once again, and welcome to the It Depends podcast. I am your host, Kevin Goldsmith. I have been a CTO for the last 8 years. I've been in the technology industry, both as a developer and manager, director, VP for the last 32 plus years. And I'm the author of the book, It Depends, Writing in Technology Leadership, 2012 to 2022. And in this podcast, if this is your first time, we serialize the audiobook of the book. And also, obviously, it's available on Audible and Spotify and all the other places you can get your audiobooks. But this way you get it a chapter at a time, and we're serializing it in order. And then I give a little bit of commentary around each chapter and a little bit of background. There's also a newsletter, which is also called It Depends. That's available at kevingoldsmith.substack.com. And that also serializes the book, but out of order. Each chapter is a different article I've written or a blog post. And so they each stand on their own. So you can subscribe to both and you won't get the same content at the same time. You get different content each week. And the podcast comes every other week. And on the alternate weeks is the newsletter. If you're interested in the book, which I hope you are, if you enjoy the podcast, you can go to itdependsbook.net, and that has links to all the stores and where you can get the ebook, the print book, hardcover, softcover, and audiobook. You can also go to your local bookstore and order it. They can do that for you as well. So it's available globally. And please, if you get some value from this podcast, please do. If you've read the book or bought the book and enjoyed it, please rate it. Please, wherever you bought it, please give it a rating. If you like the podcast, please do the same. This episode's chapter is called Every Decision Creates a Policy. And this is one of the ones that I've actually been really looking forward to talking about a little bit more in the podcast. And the reason is this lesson in the book is, I think, one of the most important lessons, one of the most important things I impart. And it's kind of obvious, but I mentor people from all different companies over many years, and I've been a manager in many years. And this is the lesson that people don't understand, or they understand it intellectually, but then when it comes to actually implementing it, they don't do it. And it causes a lot of damage. I have made the mistakes I talk about in this chapter, and it created a lot of problems. It's especially common, the mistake I talk about, which is you make a decision, and it seems like a pretty reasonable decision at the time. Somebody asks for something, somebody wants to do something, somebody has a way of implementing something, whatever. And they say, hey, this is the way we want to do it. And you go, that seems cool. Sure, why not? And then 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, a month later, 2 months later, somebody else comes to you and they say, hey, I'd like to do this thing. And you say, well, no, that doesn't make a lot of sense, or here's why we can't do that. And they say, well, wait a second. A month ago, you told this other person that this other person asked the same thing. And you said that was fine. And now you're saying it's not okay. Why is it okay for them, but not okay for me? And you may say, well, I mean, it's not exactly the same. It's sort of different. They were asking like this and you were asking like this or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily ring true to the person. And even, and maybe they asked for the exact same thing, but now you're out of budget or something else has come up and you can't say yes. And now you're in a position where you seem like a jerk. You seem like you're playing favorites. You seem like whatever. And enough managers do this. Now, what starts to happen is somebody comes to you and they say, hey, I want to go to this conference. And you say, that's kind of that conference is on another continent. It's going to be really expensive for you to travel to that conference. Maybe you could find a conference, closer to where you live. And they say, well, my friend, this other team is going to that conference and they live down the street from me. So why do they get to go and I don't get to go? And you go, well, their manager said yes. And I'm saying no. Now it looks like managers are inconsistent. So now you're the jerk manager, and that other manager is the nice manager that's letting their people attend conferences on other continents. Eventually, this happens enough, and I've seen this pattern over and over and over and over again. Eventually, this happens so frequently, the company feels like, hey, you know what? This is getting nuts. Morale is down. People think management is really not talking to each other or really chaotic. It starts to show up in company surveys. And so the company says, okay, it's clear we let this go too long. We need to create a policy. And the company usually will overreact because you get this kind of thing very often. So now they're going to create a really rigid policy. And it really feels like the hammer coming down. All of a sudden, something that was easy is now super hard or covered by rules. And now everybody's unhappy, but you're all unhappy the same. So, okay. But now it feels like, oh, what's happening in our company? We used to have all this freedom and now we don't. This is a pretty common cycle. And I'll also say, generally, the problems like this kind of problem is a bigger problem for smaller companies, for startups, right? I didn't have these kind of problems at Microsoft because guess what? I didn't have a lot of leeway as a manager at Microsoft. What could be expensed? Well, here's a massive document that says exactly what can be expensed. And you put something in that can't be expensed, doesn't matter. It's not going to get approved. Even if I say it's okay, not going to get approved. At a bigger company, these are the rules, and oftentimes they'll be set at a corporate level or even at an organizational level. So bigger company managers usually don't have the kind of freedom to do this kind of arbitrary creation of policies. So it is more of a startup problem, but it happens also in some big company, right? The trick of it is, and I talk about this in the chapter, the trick of it is every time you make a decision, it seems totally reasonable, doesn't seem arbitrary, you have good rationale behind it. Just think about writing down that rationale, having somebody read it back to you, right? And go, all right, does that make sense to me if I wasn't in the conversation? Think about it like that, because essentially that's what's going to happen when the next person comes, right? And also be aware, sometimes it's not like you should say no to every request, because you shouldn't. Like there are many, many reasonable requests that you should absolutely say yes to, but be aware, if you say yes to this person, you have to say yes to the next person. And the next person may ask for the exact same thing and it's totally reasonable, but now you're out of travel budget. Or the situation just slightly different where the answer is now no, where it would have been yes otherwise, right? So that's the kind of stuff you have to think about, is not just like, well, we got the money. Again, somebody wants to travel to a conference on another continent, and you know what? This year, like no one's really taking advantage of the travel budget. So you got a bunch of money in your travel budget, and you're like, yeah, we got the money. Why not? So you tell them, yeah, okay, yeah, go for it. The next year, 5 people want to go to this conference, and now that alone is blowing out. This person has a great time to come back and tell everybody what a great conference it was. 5 people want to go, and now that's beyond your travel budget, and you have to say no. We don't have that money, and that is a totally reasonable reason why the answer is no to you, but it's not going to be to any of them. Won't make sense. Well, you said Fred could go. Why can't I go? Well, when I said yes to Fred, we had a ton of money in the travel budget. Now we don't. Well, that still seems, it is logical and it is correct, but it doesn't seem logical or correct to the person that's hearing this for the first time and maybe has never heard this reason before. It now sounds like you're making excuses. And that's the danger you get into when you as a manager, as an individual, or you as a group of managers collectively within your organization, if you are not clear and you are not consistent, it starts to look like, from the outside, it really starts to look like either you're all making it up as you go along, which means you're playing favorites. Even if you aren't, people decide you are, and they'll look for reasons why, because they don't understand, and they don't see what you see. Or it looks like you're completely disorganized. Or it looks like I said, like some managers are nice and some managers are mean. And then all of a sudden, you're being cast as a mean manager because you're being more careful than somebody else, right? So this is why in this chapter I talk about I create a lot of process around making a decision. I do. I ask you to do some work if you're answering a novel question, because I want you to think about the fact that you're not answering this question once. You are now setting a precedent. You are creating a policy for your organization until there's a new policy that supersedes it. It's not like you're making this decision for all time, because companies change and stuff changes around. But what you want to be able to do is share your decision in a way that other managers are in agreement with it, that your boss is in agreement with it, that finance is going to do it. Because the other thing I talk about oftentimes, especially amongst less experienced managers, is somebody will make a request that you think is totally reasonable. Oh yeah, sure, yeah. Why couldn't you expense that? And they submit their expense report, and you approve it, and it goes to the finance person. The finance person goes, "This is against policy." And you go, "Well, I approved it." And they go, "I don't care. Like, you shouldn't have approved it. You should know our policy." And they reject it. And it goes back to the employee. And the employee says, "Wait a second, I thought you said it was okay." And you say, "Well, I thought it was okay." And the employee's like, "But now I have to pay for it." Like, managers, and you, as the manager, have to go, "Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I got this wrong." And that makes you look, one, like you don't know your job, and two, like you're not actually empowered to make these decisions, which means that next time your employee has a question like this, maybe they go to your manager instead of asking you, because you clearly don't know what's going on. Similarly, somebody says like, "Hey, I need to borrow some, I'm past my vacation. I need to borrow some extra vacation past what I have or past what I'm allowed to." And you say, "Okay," because the rationale they present to you seems really okay. And then HR says, "What are you doing?" You say, "Well, no, I thought this is reasonable." And HR says, "We can't that we have a rule. The rule says you can only do this much vacation. You've now let this person break the rule. We can't let this happen because now everybody will want to break that rule. You've now kind of done that." And now they overrule you. And now you have to go back to the person on your team and go, "I'm sorry, I said you could, but now you can't." And then they say, "Well, wait a second, I just bought the ticket because you said it was okay." And again, you look like you don't know what's going on, and you can't be trusted with answering these kind of questions. So they stop asking you them and they ask other people. So this is why we do it. This is why I advocate for thinking it through, treating it like you're creating a policy, and also trying to make sure that other people are aware that you're making this decision, because you kind of are making this decision for your peers. And you want to make sure, one, they're on board, and two, your boss is on board. And if they have any concerns, like, they bring it up, because you don't want them to have someone come to them and do the same thing. "My friend in Kevin's team got this. Why can't I?" And then they're in a position of either saying, "Because I say so," or "Because this person shouldn't have gotten it, and that's kind of Kevin's problem," or whatever. And then again, you all look like you don't know what's going on as a group, which is not great. So it seems like a lot of work for every decision. And do I think every possible decision needs to go through this big deal process? No, but especially if you don't have a lot of experience, you've maybe worked at one company, this is your first management job, where you don't have as much experience with these kind of decisions and understanding like how policy differs in each company, or actually understanding what the policies are in your own company, because you haven't had to enforce them. You've just had to sort of live with them as they come up as an employee. I would advocate for kind of leaning more into this process of kind of documenting it and discussing it, or at least start off by discussing it with your boss instead of just going from the cuff, yeah, sounds great, go for it. Over time, as you get more experienced, you'd have to do that less because one, you understand the kinds of things that tend to crop up. This headphone example I give, it's happened at 4 different companies, including, one where it made the most sense because it was a company where we all had desks next to each other, a kind of open plan office. And sure, it could get loud. And so a developer was asking, could I expense some headphones because it's really hard for me to focus? One decision, right? And then the answer, that might be yes, but let's talk to IT and figure out what headphones they are prepared to buy for everyone if people ask for it, right? So you don't get to go and buy like $500 super duper noise canceling headphones and then expense it. Maybe you get these cheaper ones because that's what we're prepared to pay for everyone if everyone asks. So that seems more reasonable. I've even had it from employees who work from home in a fully remote company where an employee says, I need headphones to work at home. And the answer is, why would we pay for headphones for you to work at home? Like, you control your home environment. And especially in this case, because we also provided free co-working spaces for people if their house was too loud or whatever. And so it's sort of like a very weird, unusual request. But it has come up over and over and over again. That's why I use that particular example. But the other examples I've heard too. So because I've now had that happen multiple times, yeah, I have a better handle on it. You will too, as you've been doing the job a bit longer. But at first, it's probably better to ask until you start to understand the kind of things that are really important kind of decisions that have long-term impact versus kind of minor things that obviously are not going to really be a problem. But if you're looking for a kind of guide, the best thing I can recommend, the way to think about it would be so a person is coming and asking you a question today. Another example I give is I want to write something in a new programming language or a different programming language than we generally use in the company. And that may be reasonable. They may have a really good reason for it. It may be their best language to solve this problem. Okay. So you say, yeah. And then tomorrow, somebody else comes and they say, I want to solve this problem in this completely other programming language. To start imagining, or a third person, I want to use this language. And all of a sudden, within your team, within your company, you're using 50 programming languages. That's unsustainable. Unless you're explicitly allowing that. Some companies do, but most don't, because it's really hard to maintain code in 50 languages. So think about it in that terms. Somebody asks you for headphones today. Okay, sure, expense them. Now imagine everyone on the team, one day at a time, comes to you, or 1 month at a time, comes to you and says, I would like to expense it. I would like to expense headphones. I would like to expense headphones. Because they will, because their friend gets headphones. You go, oh, cool. Why are you? And they tell them, oh, I expensed them. You go, wow, I'd like headphones too. And then the team in the next room, and the team in the next office, and the team in the next office. Just keep that in mind. And when you're answering a question, and think about, is that okay? And if that's okay, or you think that's okay, then okay, that might be a decision you might be able to make. But also think, even if I think that's okay, do I think the company would think that's okay? Do I think my manager would think that's okay? His manager or her manager, the CTO, that would think that's okay. And use that way of thinking about it. And that'll help you decide which things you can say, no, that seems pretty reasonable. And which things you say, you know what, I got to ask. Thank you for asking me about it. I'd like to check on a couple things before I give an answer. So if you don't mind, like, give me a day or something and I'll get an answer back for you. Right. And that's a very, 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 very simple and very reasonable thing to do. And no one should have a problem. No one on your team should have a problem with you actually doing the homework, just to make sure that this is cool before you give them an answer. They should be okay with it. So, now I present the chapter, Every Decision Creates a Policy. Every Decision Creates a Policy, originally published on July 26, 2021. It seems like a simple question. Can I expense these headphones? Or can we write this service in Elixir? The person asking may have a good reason. They may have an excellent performance history. The request is simple. Why not grant it? You're an experienced manager, the proposal seems reasonable, and you want your team to like you. We may make dozens of small decisions each week without considering their implications. These decisions, however, unintentionally create policies for our team or our organization that we will have to contend with later. A simple expense decision for a single team member often doesn't make sense when applied to everyone on the team. Your rationale for granting the first request rings hollow when denying it to someone else. You may or may not realize that your decision violates a company policy or has unintended consequences for the finance or legal teams. When challenged by these teams, you are forced to rescind your decision, thus disappointing your team member and suggesting that you aren't even empowered to make these decisions. Allowing a developer to use a new language to write a service may let them grow their technical skills. It quickly becomes problematic when other developers on the team want to use different languages, and your codebase becomes increasingly challenging to maintain. Each request you grant or deny is inevitably shared with everyone on your team and with other teams as well. When it is shared, the details and reasoning behind the original decision are often lost. When a second person comes forward with what they think is a similar request and you respond differently, it suggests that you will act capriciously or play favorites. When a person on another team asks the same from their lead using your decision as justification, you put that manager in an awkward position. Some companies give a lot of autonomy to their leads. This freedom helps teams to move faster and gives them more ownership and accountability. However, suppose the leaders in these teams make inconsistent decisions about travel, benefits, job offers, promotions, or software architecture. The result is eventually chaos. To the company employees, it seems that the leadership is uncoordinated and full of conflict. Lacking any clear reasoning on why different teams do things differently, people will try to invent rationales, which are usually wrong and can sometimes assume the worst in management. An inconsistent leadership produces increasingly low morale, and the result is often an overcorrection. Senior company leadership creates new, excessively rigid policies to clear the accumulated management debt. This correction can also feel like the hammer coming down, or a startup suddenly feeling very corporate. Even if the problems and corrections aren't so extreme, these simple, beneficial actions will help you to be more consistent with your peers. When there is a new situation. If someone on the team approaches you with a novel request, do not give them an immediate, definitive answer. Instead, let the person know that you will investigate and get back to them. If you have established company policies for expensing, remote working, software architecture, or something else that may cover the situation, check there first. If the answer is not definitive, raise your intended response to your manager. If it is about benefits or expensing, include the most appropriate HR representative. This step may seem unnecessary at first, but if you are clear that you are trying to be consistent with others, that should help your team member to understand. When you want an exception to an existing policy. If the issue isn't new, but you think the situation warrants an exception to the policy, you need to think carefully. The exception may be wholly justified, but will this invite more people to seek exceptions? How can you clearly and objectively state the reasons for granting this exception? How will you update the policy to carve out this specific exception? While it can be uncomfortable not to give an exception to someone you think deserves it, it may be the right decision in the long run. If you wish to create an exception to an existing policy, let the person know that you'll need to discuss it with management due to the current guidelines. Document your reasoning for the exception and share it with your manager, and if relevant, someone from the people team or HR department. You'll need their support and approval. Document the decision. If you decide on a new policy or are changing an existing policy, it is a good practice to document the decisions and share it with your peers. A simple one-page document describing the situation, the thought process on the resolution, the existing company policies or other peer decisions that influence this choice, the decision itself, any caveats around the decision, and the outcome for the individual affected. Share this document with your peers. You may choose to get their input before finalizing the decision since it will affect them as well. Again, you are creating a precedent. If you're looking for a specific template, there are the Toyota A3 or the Spotify Dibs. For software architecture, the architecture decision record are documents that many organizations use. Suppose you are part of a particularly transparent organization. In this case, you may want to share a redacted version to protect the individual's privacy with the rest of the organization. Over time, these decisions can be collected and refined into a new handbook for your organization. Isn't this overly complicated? This suggested process may seem more complicated than it needs to be. To make a simple decision around expensing headphones, I need to consult the employee handbook, ask my manager and HR, write up a one-page decision document, and then send it to my peers. It does seem like a lot of work. Consider the alternative. In a one-to-one, someone from your team asks if they can take a vacation for 2 weeks, right before the team's big deadline. When you say that the timing is not suitable for the team, they tell you about their friend on another team who was allowed to do precisely that. Talking to the other lead, they say that they didn't think it was a problem. Do you now become the mean manager that doesn't let people on the team take a vacation, or do you put the team's commitment in jeopardy to be consistent with your peers? This scenario may seem far-fetched, but it happens all the time, especially in scaling organizations that move from being a relatively unconstrained startup to being a more structured company. The best thing for everyone on the team is for managers to be consistent, and to be consistent, they must communicate. For your organization, you may find more straightforward ways to communicate decisions and achieve consistency between leads. If so, please share them. That was Every Decision Creates a Policy. I hope that you got some value out of it. I hope that you got the long explanation before. Hopefully that supported what I talked about in the chapter. If you have any questions, about this idea or anything in regards to this, please email me. I'd love to hear from you. The email address is contact@itdependsbook.net. It Depends Book, one word. Similarly, if you're interested in the book, please check out that website, itdependsbook.net. Again, It Depends Book, all one word. And you can also just go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or bookshop.org or 100 other bookseller websites and Focus and all the ones in every country have it and get it there as well if you'd prefer. It is currently only in English, I will tell you that at the moment. I also want to call out, especially for those of you on the East Coast of the US or North America, that I'm speaking again at Leading Edge in New York in September, and you can come and see. I'm giving a talk on the director to CTO path, how to walk it or how to mentor it. And as part of that, I'll also have office hours. So you can also, ask me questions to my face that I will be delighted to answer for you. So once again, if you're interested in the book, go check out itdependsbook.net. And once again, please like, rate, share this podcast with your friends if you think it would be valuable for them. Subscribe to the newsletter, buy the book. Appreciate all of it. Ask me questions if you have them. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the podcast again in 2 weeks. I'll see you in the newsletter next week. Have a good week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.